January 16, 1944. The sun rose over the volcanic slopes of Tinian, spilling molten gold across the tarmac. Massive silver birds rested in neat rows, their polished aluminum skins gleaming like liquid mirrors. Crews moved with quiet urgency, their breaths visible in the crisp morning air, misting in the early chill. A low hum began to swell as engines roared to life, vibrating through the concrete like distant thunder. Inside the B-29 Superfortress, the cabin was a sealed cocoon of cold metal and warm air. Pressurization systems hissed softly, maintaining life at 30,000 feet, where the sky thinned to an eerie blue, and oxygen masks became lifelines. Crew members tightened straps, double-checked instruments, and exchanged terse nods, each aware of the distance and danger separating them from home. Below, the ocean stretched like a silver carpet, hiding enemy defenses, yet promising no mercy if discovered. These aircraft were more than bombers. They were the embodiment of American ingenuity. Every rivet, every valve, every tube in the pressurized cabin represented months of sweat, trial, and failure. The secret that made these missions possible was invisible to the eye, but vital to survival. The cabins allowed men to breathe, think, and fight in the thin upper atmosphere. Soon these wings of aluminum would carry them over Japan in a war of steel and strategy unlike anything seen before. And so, with engines screaming and hearts heavy, they taxied forward, ready to pierce the sky. Theirs was not just a flight, it was the opening act of a new era in air warfare. By mid-1944, the Pacific War had reached a critical juncture. The Japanese Empire, once seemingly invincible across the islands and coastlines of Southeast Asia, was beginning to falter under the relentless pressure of American naval and air power. The fall of Saipan, Tinian, and Guam had brought the Allied forces within striking distance of the Japanese home islands, yet the challenge remained immense. Japan's industrial heartlands were heavily fortified, and conventional bombers lacked both the range and altitude to reach them without facing catastrophic losses. Before the B-29, the United States had relied on aircraft like the B-17 Flying Fortress and the B-24 Liberator. These bombers had earned fame in Europe for their precision raids over Germany, yet in the vast expanse of the Pacific, they revealed their limits. Their operational ceilings were too low, their range insufficient, and their crews suffered under freezing temperatures at high altitudes, risking hypoxia in the thin air. The Japanese, aware of these limitations, had layered their defenses with anti-aircraft artillery, radar-guided tracking, and fighter interceptors, making any mission above the mainland a deadly gamble. The strategic need was clear. The U.S. Army Air Forces required a bomber capable of reaching targets deep within Japan from bases as far as the Marianas, while carrying a payload large enough to cripple industrial production. Equally critical was crew survivability. High-altitude missions demanded life support systems that could keep airmen conscious and functional at 30,000 feet, far above the operational ceiling of existing bombers. The B-29 Superfortress was conceived in response to this exact challenge. Its pressurized cabins allowed the crew to operate in near-normal conditions, even at extreme altitudes. This technology was not merely an advantage, it was a prerequisite for the envisioned bombing campaigns. By isolating men from the lethal thinness of upper atmosphere air, engineers enabled a level of endurance and operational efficiency previously impossible. The aircraft's range, combined with the ability to sustain long flights at high altitude, promised to turn the strategic calculus against Japan. Yet, the development of such technology was fraught with risk. Every pressurization system added weight, complexity, and potential points of failure. Engine overheating, structural integrity, and the sheer scale of the aircraft became daily challenges for engineers. Meanwhile, military planners pressed for immediate deployment, knowing that delays could cost thousands of lives and prolong the war. From the vantage point of Tinian, the horizon seemed calm, but across the Pacific, the balance of strategy and technology teetered on a knife's edge. Every decision about aircraft, crew, and mission planning could mean the difference between a decisive strike and a catastrophic loss. The stakes had never been higher, and the world was watching as the United States prepared to redefine long-range air warfare. The B-29 Superfortress did not emerge fully formed. It was the product of relentless innovation, trial and error. Boeing's initial designs in 1939 and 1940 were ambitious, almost audacious. Engineers imagined an aircraft that could fly farther, faster and higher than anything before it, while carrying a bomb load capable of striking at the very core of enemy industry. Central to this vision was pressurization, a technology still in its infancy. At the time, only a few experimental aircraft had attempted to maintain habitable cabins at high altitude, and most had failed catastrophically. By 1942, prototypes began to take shape. The B-29's massive wingspan, nearly 141 feet, housed powerful Wright R3350 engines. These engines, designed to deliver unprecedented speed and altitude, were notoriously temperamental, prone to overheating and fire. Early test flights revealed the dual challenge. The pressurization system, though conceptually sound, stressed the airframe and required airtight seals that could withstand pressure differentials equivalent to several thousand feet of altitude change. Every ascent was a test of human ingenuity as much as engineering skill. Inside the pressurized cabin, crews were shielded from the near vacuum of the upper atmosphere. Oxygen masks became unnecessary under normal operations. Heaters kept extremities from freezing, and the aircraft's design minimized fatigue during flights that could last 12 hours or more. Yet achieving this required thousands of man-hours. Mathematicians calculated air pressure differentials, machinists fabricated precision valves, and engineers coordinated engine cooling systems to prevent the R3350 from melting under prolonged strain. Each innovation carried risk. A minor leak or engine failure could spell disaster at 30,000 feet. Crew training ran parallel to technological development. Men were conditioned to operate under the new parameters of high-altitude flight. Bombardiers, gunners, and pilots learned to trust instruments over instinct, to rely on the cabin environment that kept their bodies functional even as the world outside thinned to a bluish void. Simulated flights in pressurized chambers, emergency drills, and long endurance tests became standard, ensuring that when the aircraft finally reached operational readiness, human performance matched the machine's capability. By late 1943, B-29 began arriving in the Marianas, each aircraft a monument to industrial scale, technical ambition, and human perseverance. The first combat-ready planes were fragile in appearance, yet within them flowed the confidence of engineers, pilots, and commanders alike. Every rivet and sealed panel spoke of months of painstaking work, of sacrifices in laboratories and factories thousands of miles away. The technology was ready, but its ultimate test lay over the skies of Japan. From these early flights emerged a quiet but undeniable truth. Pressurized cabins would allow men to survive and fight at altitudes that would have killed any other aircrew. The B-29 was more than a bomber. It was a bridge to a new way of waging war. And as the planes lined up on the Tinian runway, engines rumbling like distant storms, the crews prepared to turn engineering triumph into battlefield reality. High above the Pacific, 30,000 feet from land and safety, the human experience inside the B-29 was a study in extremes. For the crew, the pressurized cabin was both a sanctuary and a confining chamber. Gone were the biting cold and dizzying thinness that plagued earlier high-altitude missions. Oxygen flowed freely, temperatures remained survivable, and instruments hummed with steady reliability. Yet isolation weighed heavily. Pilots stared through plexiglass canopies at a sky that seemed impossibly vast, knowing that one miscalculation could send the plane plummeting into the ocean. Bombardiers hunched over their northern sights, eyes strained, hands trembling slightly from both adrenaline and the hum of engines. Every man carried the tension of knowing his life was dependent not just on skill, but on the integrity of the pressurized capsule that separated him from the void. Crew camaraderie became essential. Shared glances, terse words, and practiced signals allowed men to operate as a single organism. They relied on one another to monitor engine temperatures, check instruments, and man defensive positions. The human angle of the B-29 mission was inseparable from technology. The pressurized cabin preserved not only bodies but the cohesion of the team, enabling them to function effectively during 12-hour missions across hostile skies. Fear existed, but it was disciplined fear, harnessed and contained by the structure around them. From a tactical perspective, the B-29 redefined the parameters of bombing warfare. Its range allowed planners to strike at targets previously considered unreachable. From the Marianas, the aircraft could reach industrial complexes in Tokyo, Osaka, and Nagoya, bypassing the layered defenses that had grounded other bombers. High-altitude bombing required precision navigation. Crews relied on dead reckoning, celestial fixes, and the Norden bomb site to deliver payloads across hundreds of miles of open ocean and enemy territory. Flying at 30,000 feet offered protection from most Japanese fighters and anti-aircraft fire, yet accuracy suffered from the extreme altitude, unpredictable winds, and limited visual cues. Leadership within the Air Force adapted accordingly. Commanders planned missions with meticulous attention to timing, formation integrity, and fuel management. The pressurized cabin enabled extended flights and higher altitudes, but it also required careful coordination between aircraft to maximize defensive coverage. Squadrons learned to fly in tight boxes, overlapping fields of fire, balancing offensive potential with defensive necessity. The human and tactical angles intersected in a delicate balance. Men depended on technology, technology depended on maintenance, and missions depended on both operating in perfect harmony. Every raid carried risk, but the pressurized cabin gave crews the edge of endurance and cognitive clarity. It was a small space, yet it contained the lives, decisions, and fate of men whose actions would echo across the Pacific. The B-29 was a marvel of engineering, a synthesis of cutting-edge aerodynamics, propulsion, and life support systems. At the heart of its technological advantage was the pressurized cabin. By maintaining an artificial atmosphere at 30,000 feet, it allowed crews to operate without supplemental oxygen masks or extreme thermal gear. The design included multiple sealed compartments, redundant air pumps, and carefully monitored pressure valves, ensuring that even a partial system failure would not immediately jeopardize the mission. Every panel, every gasket, and every instrument was engineered with the knowledge that lives depended on it. Beyond the cabin, the aircraft's Wright R3350 engines represented both power and peril. Each 200 horsepower radial engine allowed the B-29 to climb above most anti-aircraft defenses and evade interception. Yet these engines were temperamental, prone to overheating, and required constant vigilance from flight engineers. Fuel management became a complex calculation of weight, distance, altitude, and temperature. The interplay of cabin pressurization and engine performance demanded not only engineering foresight but constant crew monitoring, with every system interdependent. The Norden bomb site, another technological leap, offered a promise of precision previously unimaginable at extreme altitudes. Bombardiers could calculate wind drift, ground speed, and altitude adjustments with instruments linked to the aircraft's navigation systems. Despite its sophistication, success was never guaranteed. Atmospheric conditions, mechanical imperfections, and human fatigue could all influence the final impact. Technology gave crews the tools to strike, but skill, patience, and judgment determined the outcome. The Japanese defense presented a formidable challenge. Anti-aircraft guns littered strategic locations, and radar stations tracked high-altitude aircraft with increasing sophistication. Fighters such as the Mitsubishi J-2M and Ki-61, while generally limited to lower altitudes, still posed intermittent threats when B-29s descended for bombing runs or encountered turbulence. Japan's industrial landscape was dispersed across islands, requiring meticulous planning and coordination to locate targets. The enemy understood the stakes. Losses of any aircraft were politically and militarily significant, and crews faced both mechanical and human threats in every sortie. Finally, there was a moral dimension to consider. The B-29's long-range bombing capacity made total war possible in ways never before experienced. Entire cities could be reached, and if necessary, destroyed with limited risk to aircrews. While the pressurized cabin preserved life at high altitudes, it also facilitated attacks that would later provoke profound ethical reflection. The human, technological, and enemy angles converged in each mission, men operating within a protective shell of engineering brilliance, confronting the harsh realities of warfare against a determined opponent. The technological triumph of the B-29 and its pressurized cabins enabled the operational and human factors we have explored, setting the stage for the climactic missions that would change the course of the air war over Japan. November 24, 1944. The first combat-ready B-29 safe lifted from Saipan, slicing through clouds as the sun dipped behind the horizon. Pilots adjusted throttles, monitoring engine temperatures and cabin pressure, each instrument a lifeline in the fragile ballet of flight. Bombardiers stared through the northern sights, their hands steady despite adrenaline, eyes scanning the darkened Japanese coastline far below. The pressurized cabins kept men alert, their bodies functioning in an atmosphere that would have left earlier aircrews gasping or unconscious. The targets that day were industrial complexes near Tokyo, the beating heart of Japan's war production. At 30,000 feet, the B-29s glided almost silently through layers of enemy radar detection, their altitude making interception difficult for conventional fighters. Yet the first missions were far from perfect. Mechanical failures plagued several aircraft, overheating engines forced emergency returns, pressurization leaks jolted crews awake, and small navigational errors meant bombs fell miles from their intended marks. Each challenge tested not only the machine but the men inside, whose survival depended on maintaining composure under extreme conditions. Encounters with Japanese defenders were brief but intense. Anti-aircraft flak erupted in orange bursts far below, and a few daring fighters attempted to climb to the B-29's stratospheric heights. Even when fighters could not reach them, turbulence, wind shear, and freezing winds at the edge of the atmosphere presented constant threats. Despite these challenges, crews adapted quickly. Radio communication between squadrons allowed coordinated maneuvers, and gunners in remote-controlled turrets relied on training and technology to cover blind spots. Each sortie was a learning experience. Pilots refined formation flying at high altitude, discovering optimal climb rates and attack angles. Bombardiers adjusted the northern bombsight calculations to account for the unique wind patterns at 30,000 feet. Flight engineers developed emergency protocols for engine failures that minimized loss of life. With each mission, the pressurized cabin proved its worth. Men could endure the extremes of altitude for hours, making tactical decisions with clarity and precision. The first raids were not decisive in terms of destruction, but they were revolutionary in demonstrating what the B-29 could achieve. Enemy observers, Japanese command, and even American planners recognized that a new era of strategic bombing had begun. The challenges of distance, altitude, and enemy defenses were being met by the combination of human skill and technological ingenuity, with pressurization at the core of every success. These first flights set the tone for the campaigns to follow, preparing crews for missions that would push both men and machines to their absolute limits, shaping the turning point of air warfare over Japan. By early 1945, the B-29 had moved beyond experimental raids into sustained strategic bombardment. Bases on Saipan and Tinian now launched waves of superfortresses in carefully timed sequences. Crews had mastered high-altitude flight, formation discipline, and precision navigation. Pressurized cabins, once a novelty, had become essential. Men could endure 12-hour sorties, operating at peak cognitive and physical capacity, while thousands of feet above the clouds. This endurance was decisive. Missions that would have been fatal for earlier bombers became routine, as pilots, bombardiers, and gunners relied on their aircraft's engineered envelope of safety. The turning point came during the March 9th, 10 firebombing of Tokyo. Hundreds of B-29s flying at altitudes near 28,000 feet unleashed incendiary payloads designed to ignite entire city blocks. Japanese air defenses, already stretched thin, struggled to respond. Anti-aircraft fire and scattered fighter intercepts inflicted some losses, but the overwhelming altitude and coordination of the raids minimized casualties among U.S. crews. The pressurized cabins allowed sustained operations at high altitudes, preventing hypoxia and extreme fatigue that had crippled crews in earlier bombing campaigns over Europe. Tactically, the B-29's high-altitude capability forced Japanese defenses into a reactive posture. Fighters could only intercept a fraction of incoming bombers, and flak, designed for lower altitudes, proved largely ineffective. Commanders observed that crews in pressurized cabins maintained focus, accuracy, and endurance far beyond previous limits. The ability to reach Japan from the Marianas without refueling, without descending into dangerous airspace for extended periods, allowed the U.S. Army Air Forces to strike deep into the industrial heart of the Japanese Empire with unprecedented frequency. The impact of these raids was both immediate and cumulative. Factories producing aircraft, ships, and munitions were severely disrupted. Morale in Japan began to falter as civilians and military personnel realized that even the remotest cities were now within reach of the U.S. bomber fleet. For American planners, the B-29 represented a strategic hammer capable of shaping the conflict's endgame. High-altitude missions made possible by pressurized cabins provided a blend of operational reach, human endurance, and tactical surprise that had no precedent. Every mission reinforced the lesson. Technology and human adaptation were inseparable. Crews relied on the pressurized cabin not merely for survival, but to maintain the clarity and discipline necessary for complex, coordinated operations. The B-29 had transformed from an experimental superfortress into a decisive weapon. In the skies over Japan, aluminum and pressurized air carried the momentum of strategy, human resilience, and engineering brilliance, marking a turning point that would echo through the final months of the Pacific War. The aftermath of the first sustained B-29 bombing campaigns was immediate and stark. Tokyo, Osaka, and Nagoya bore the brunt of precision and incendiary raids, leaving scorched industrial zones, shattered factories, and flattened residential districts. While initial sorties had been cautious, by early 1945, the intensity and scale of operations increased dramatically. Reports from American commanders noted both the effectiveness of high-altitude precision and the psychological impact on Japanese defenses, which were increasingly incapable of mounting effective countermeasures. Losses among U.S. crews, though significant, were lower than initially feared. The pressurized cabins had preserved airmen against the harsh conditions of the stratosphere, where crews of earlier bombers might have succumbed to hypoxia or frostbite during long-range missions. B-29 crews maintained operational efficiency and coordination. Aircraft losses were primarily the result of mechanical failure or concentrated enemy attacks rather than altitude limitations. The distinction was crucial. Technology had shifted the balance, allowing men to perform their duties under conditions previously considered unsurvivable. For the Japanese military, the raids were a wake-up call. Anti-aircraft batteries, dispersed and often outdated, struggled to reach aircraft cruising at altitudes beyond their design limits. Fighter intercepts, though occasionally successful, could not keep pace with the superfortress's range, speed, and altitude. The strategic calculus changed almost overnight. Industrial centers previously thought safe were now vulnerable, and the Japanese command faced the realization that its homeland could no longer be shielded by geography alone. Civilian populations felt the shock most immediately. Dense urban areas, often located near factories, were devastated by incendiary bombings. Survivors recounted entire neighborhoods disappearing in hours, with firestorms consuming infrastructure, homes, and lives. From the U.S. perspective, the psychological effect on the enemy was as significant as physical destruction. The very existence of a bomber, capable of reaching Tokyo from the Marianas, without refueling underscored a technological and strategic gap that Japan could not close quickly. Within the U.S. military, reports highlighted lessons learned from these early missions. Crew performance, engine reliability, and pressurization effectiveness were meticulously documented. Each sortie informed subsequent planning, improving bombing accuracy, fuel management, and formation discipline. The immediate consequences were clear. The B-29 had established a new paradigm for strategic bombing, combining human endurance and engineering ingenuity in ways the world had not seen before. As 1945 progressed, the strategic and technological legacy of the B-29 became increasingly evident. The aircraft's pressurized cabins had not only saved lives, they had reshaped the very nature of aerial warfare. Crews could endure hours of high-altitude flight, allowing planners to strike targets deep within enemy territory with precision that previous bombers could only dream of. The psychological advantage was immense. Air crews, confident in their survival, operated with clarity and discipline, while Japanese defenders faced a near insurmountable challenge. The technological breakthroughs went beyond pressurization. Supercharged engines allowed sustained flight at altitudes and speeds that rendered many conventional fighters ineffective. Remote-controlled gun turrets and advanced navigation instruments, including the Norden bombsight, transformed the B-29 into a flying fortress capable of both offense and defense in a single integrated system. These innovations informed post-war aviation, influencing jet bombers and strategic aircraft that would dominate the Cold War. The marriage of technology and human endurance in the B-29 set a precedent for future aircraft design, emphasizing crew survivability as much as offensive capability. Strategically, the B-29's success forced Japan into reactive defense. Industrial output slowed, key cities suffered extensive damage, and the morale of both civilians and military personnel declined. The United States, for its part, gained the ability to conduct sustained bombing campaigns without the attrition rates that had plagued earlier missions in Europe and North Africa. Pressurized cabins, by enabling longer flights and higher altitudes, made this possible. Missions that had once been considered impossible became routine, and the cumulative effect eroded Japan's capacity to continue the war effectively. The legacy extended to aircrew psychology. Men who had endured the extreme conditions of earlier bombing campaigns found themselves operating in a relatively controlled environment, increasing effectiveness and reducing the risk of human error. Training programs that integrated pressurization, high-altitude navigation, and endurance strategies created a cadre of airmen capable of executing complex operations with precision. In essence, the B-29 redefined what air warfare could achieve by preserving the human element as much as mastering the mechanical one. By the time hostilities neared their end, the B-29 had proven that technology could expand the operational envelope of warplanes while safeguarding the crews who flew them. Its pressurized cabins were no longer a novelty, they were a critical component of victory, a bridge between human endurance and strategic impact. The immediate consequences of its deployment had faded into history, but its influence on both warfare and aviation technology endured far beyond the skies of 1945. The story of the B-29 and its pressurized cabins is a testament to the intersection of human courage and technological ingenuity. In the high stratosphere above the Pacific, men relied on machines not just to reach their targets, but to survive the extremes of altitude, temperature, and distance. The pressurized cabin transformed vulnerability into capability, turning human endurance into a weapon as precise as any bomb. It was a quiet revolution, invisible to those on the ground, yet decisive in shaping the air war over Japan. Beyond strategy and machinery, the B-29 symbolizes the broader trajectory of modern warfare. It demonstrated that survival and efficiency could be engineered, that technology could extend the human body and mind into realms once deemed impossible. Airmen became partners with the aircraft, operating in harmony with pressurized cabins, sophisticated engines, and navigation instruments. Each mission was a collaboration of human skill and technological design, an experiment in endurance and precision that redefined what it meant to fight from the sky. The consequences of this innovation extended far beyond World War II. Post-war bombers, long-range reconnaissance planes, and eventually jet-powered strategic aircraft inherited lessons from the B-29, the necessity of crew safety, the importance of operational altitude, and the integration of technology with human performance. The psychological, strategic, and technical impact of pressurized cabins transformed air warfare, leaving a legacy that endured for decades. Ultimately, the B-29's story is a reminder of the delicate balance between human bravery and innovation. Men faced impossible odds, but technology made their survival and success achievable. The pressurized cabin was more than metal and valves. It was a vessel of endurance, a shield that enabled precise strikes, and a symbol of ingenuity in the service of strategy. In the skies above Japan, it carried not only bombs but the promise of a new era, where human potential could meet the demands of war at heights once unreachable, shaping history in ways both profound and enduring.